Thank you. Check, check, check. Everybody hear me? This is such a cool venue. Especially coming off of doing another event, it's so nice to, like I go to a bunch of these things and seeing a lot of hotel ballrooms and convention centers. It's nice to see something that's different and has its own vibe, and especially it's like I just feel at home here. I mean, this is like this could very much be a Portland. Kate Darling, who you'll hear from later, said on Twitter that this could, said that this could be in Portland, because if you think about it, I mean, we are in, this is a conference that is about, like the theme is disruption in the backyard of a vegan co-op. That is very, very Portlandy, but as I said, this could not actually be done in Portland because it rains from September to June, so it's not really possible. So I'm a writer and a programmer primarily, and over the last 10 years, I've been writing on my site waxy.org about internet culture. I do a number of things that have gotten me in weird places or in weird situations. For those of you that follow internet culture, I coined Star Wars Kid and interviewed the Star Wars Kid, one of the first viral videos. I coined Supercut. So if you've ever seen a Supercut, I run a site called supercut.org that kind of catalogs all of those, and I do web stuff. So I've worked on Kickstarter, helped build Kickstarter. I did a site that was launched here in LA back in 2003 called upcoming.org, which some of you oldsters might remember, which was a social event site, help you discover events in your local area, and ended up getting acquired by Yahoo in 2005, along with Flickr and Delicious, kind of, in the early days of the Web 2.0 thing. But one thing that I would not, if you'd asked me 5 years ago if I was going to be a record producer, I would have said no. But in May of 2009, that's exactly what happened. I produced an album because, so I'd been working on Kickstarter, and Kickstarter had launched 2 weeks prior, and I wanted an opportunity to be able to test it out, like not as a backer, but as a project creator. And so I'd been kind of casting around for an idea, something to try Kickstarter with, and I'd been thinking about this idea, which you'll either think is really, really clever or incredibly stupid. It's a very polarizing idea. But I love chiptunes. I don't know how many of you are familiar, but video game music, very 8-bit kind of sound, and so I love chiptunes. But nobody had really done a lot of experimentation with other kind of fusion genres, and especially jazz. Like I love jazz, but I love chiptunes. I'm one of that's a pretty small Venn diagram of them, I'm guessing. But I went looking online and couldn't find any, and that seemed to me to be, like, I love the idea of kind of what you would consider to be like the cold mechanical sounds of an NES with like the emotion of modal or cool jazz. So the 50th anniversary of Kind of Blue was coming up in it was going to be August of 2009. So I had this idea to do a full-length tribute, chiptune tribute to Miles Davis's Kind of Blue. And so with that, Kind of Bloop was born. And the only problem is that I'm not a musician and I have no idea how to make chiptunes, which is kind of a problem if you want to make an album. So what I did instead is I did a lot of research. I contacted musicians that I thought would do a really good job, some of them with a background in jazz, but also do chiptunes. But had never fused them in their own work. I did all the traditional research, like what is it going to cost to print CDs? What's it going to take to ship? And make sure that ultimately the artists get paid. So I did all that research, and then I listed it on Kickstarter, and within 4 hours it hit the goal. Now, in the early days of Kickstarter, we didn't know what the expectations were going to be for that. Like now, that's very common. You list a thing, and it just like it explodes, and then hits several multiples of the original goal. But at the time, it was like an early success. The numbers, by today's standards, pretty modest, but it was awesome. So what I was in that role was effectively a record producer. I was offsetting the risk, that would traditionally be come along with putting out an album for an artist and making sure that the artist gets paid. They're able to do what they love. And so we made the album, and it came out in August of 2009, just in time for the 50th anniversary. And for those few people in the world that love chiptunes and jazz, it was a huge success. It came out in the world, and I'm totally biased, but I think it's one of the best chiptune albums, and it's available on kindofloop.com. Okay. So skip 3 years to March of this year, and over the 3 years since Kickstarter launched, I've seen a wave of independent creators using technology in new ways, using new platforms to make a living doing what they love. And I thought it would be a really interesting thing to try to get those people all in the same place. The independent artists that are doing things on their own and maintaining complete creative and financial control, and put those people together with the technologists, the geeks that are making those platforms. And so we called it XOXO. It was a 4-day festival in Portland, Oregon. Was going to be in September, and that was the pitch. Was that we're just going to put all these people in one place and see what happens. And in the video, we said, well, it was me and my partner Andy. I said, we have 400 passes, and if this doesn't sell out, it's okay. It'll be a bummer, but we'll walk away, and nobody's really lost anything. And as it turns out, we didn't have to worry about that. In 2 days, we sold 400 passes at $400 each and raised $175,000 total to make this thing happen. And everything about that experience felt surreal. Like it shouldn't. The way I described it is it's like a consensual hallucination. Everybody that was there, like standing the way I am now, like standing and looking out at these 400 people, that they all visualized. They saw what we were describing, and could visualize it, tangibly in their minds enough to devote their time and money and energy into making it happen. And it was unbelievably insane and amazing, and the response was great. You can go, look up the articles on Wired and The Verge and New York Times, which gives a really good sense of what it was like. The whole topic, we said the topic was creative disruption. And of all the choices that we made, that's the one that I felt, I wouldn't say I regretted it, but I would say that it left a bad taste in my mouth over time, because the theme here is disruption too, but that word, while accurate, I think, is also sort of been co-opted. It's being used by the social media gurus and douchebag entrepreneurs that are saying they're disrupting the pet food industry or whatever it is that they're doing. But the real word for what we were talking about there was disintermediation, which doesn't roll off the tongue in the same way. But it's really just a long, fancy word for cutting out the layman. And so many of the stories that came out of that festival were artists of all types that had used technology to do that. They weren't deliberately, they weren't doing it out of hate. They were just doing it because it seemed like the best platform to use at the time. And when they were doing it, they were sort of inadvertently reinventing the way that art is being made. If you think about what those traditional gatekeepers do, so across all media, so film, music, video games, comic books, board games, journalism. You have publishers of all kinds. So record labels, film studios, book publishers, video game publishers, comic book publishers, and so on. And what they do is really valuable. Traditionally, they would alleviate the risk that would come from making art. You know, you wouldn't be able to do it on your own. It was too expensive to, like, even your living expenses would just be very challenging to do on your own. So they handle really four big areas. They handle the funding, the financing, the production, the marketing, and the distribution. And so in the last few years, what's really changed is that those middlemen aren't necessary. So they would, provide the value to, they give you the money to be able to make your work. They negotiate relationships with production companies or production facilities, or depending on what your media is, maybe they have relationships with studios. Maybe they they're handling distribution, so they have relationships with retailers online and off. They're handling all the marketing. They're basically doing all the stuff that is either too difficult or too expensive for you to do as an artist. The drawback is that they're doing that in exchange for creative and financial control. So some arrangements are better than others, but ultimately that's what it comes down to, is you are sacrificing a certain level of financial and creative control in exchange for getting your work out to a larger audience and ultimately making a living doing what you love. So, the financial control could be something as simple as, taking a percentage of equity, often, ownership or distribution rights. Creative control is usually, that's their investment. So now they're looking to make you more marketable than you, or at least their version of what they think, is marketable. And that means, asking you to make changes that you traditionally, or that you really would not want to make yourself. But you did that so that your work could get out into the world. Now, in the music industry, that's like known as selling out. It's like you're compromising your integrity. You're doing something that you don't necessarily want to do, but you're doing it because it's your best chance of bringing your art out into the world. Making something that people love, being loved, and making a living doing it. So. One of the best stories that came out of XOXO was this couple, Canadian documentary. These two Canadian documentary filmmakers, Lisa Peugeot and James Swirsky, who did a film called Indie Game the Movie. Maybe if you don't like video games, you could care less about video games. If you care about the creative process at all, I highly recommend checking it out. It's out now. You can go buy it very cheap. You can stream it online. Everything that they did in those four broad categories, they did differently and did independently. And I think that they are going to be reaping the dividends of those decisions for a very long time. So, for example, they funded the project themselves through two Kickstarter projects. First, to get the thing off the ground, and then a second one for sort of finishing funds. And then once it was far enough along, they started opening up to pre-orders, which became really successful. They marketed it completely themselves. They're using social media, of course. So they had 150 blog posts, responded to thousands of tweets, email newsletter, and putting out a series of snippets of shorts related to video game stuff that was sort of excised from the main film, which then continued to build their audience over and over time. Distribution they did completely differently. They used a brand new service called VHX, which itself is very interesting for doing DRM-free downloads and streaming. And it was the first film distributed on Steam, which is in the video game industry, it's before that point had only been used for distributing video games. And one thing that you would think would be insurmountable without working through a studio would be a theatrical release. That's one of the hardest things you could possibly do. There's monopoly relationships there. It's extraordinarily expensive, and so what they did instead is they self-funded a tour. They had over 3,000 local screening requests from people that wanted to see the film. So they took it on the road themselves. They booked independent theaters. and hopped in their car, and like you would do as an indie band, but as filmmakers, they went from theater to theater, and sold out theaters across the country, and then taking it overseas. But every one of those decisions, well, I should say, it really put them in an unusual position. So when they were ready to screen the film, they took it to Sundance, and at Sundance, it won Best Editing for a documentary, and they had a tremendous amount of attention. They wanted, like, they had publishers coming up to them that wanted to release the work into the world, and it could have been very lucrative for them. But they're looking at the compromises they'd have to make, especially with distribution. Like, they would not have been able to release it the way that they wanted, and so they made the very difficult decision not to do that. They've talked about this. That was really hard to make the decision. They said, no, we're just going to have to go on our own. And it became clear very quickly to them that it was the right decision, because they were, the sales that they've seen from it, and able to take 100%, of that revenue, ended up far exceeding what they likely would have been able to do. So, I think about projects like Indie Game, or Kind of Bloop is such a great example. Like, no publisher in the world would have touched that with a 10-foot pole, right? I mean, like, it's so niche-y, it's so quirky, and I'm not even the musician behind it. They're not going to back that, and so as a result, quite likely, it never would have existed 5 years ago. And XOXO wouldn't have existed 5 years ago, but now it's plausible. Another great story that came out of XO was Julia Nunes. Was a singer-songwriter who started doing ukulele covers in her dorm room and posting them on YouTube. She was away from college, and she didn't like anybody else on her floor in her dorm. So she basically just took her webcam. It was the only way that she knew how to record video, and just did it on her webcam and recorded them. And the only way she could figure out how to share it with her friends back home was through YouTube. And so she started posting these things. And first it started, like, her friends didn't even care, as it turns out. But other ukulele musicians on YouTube did, and they started spreading in that kind of insular musician community, and then spreading beyond that. And she was building a subscriber base on YouTube. And that's building her following. And she's doing it, she was tacking on kind of like updates to the end, sort of video blogging at the end of every one of these songs that she'd post. And over time, like, each one of these milestones would happen, where she'd hit a new level of subscribers, or she'd be featured on the YouTube homepage. And then she recorded a song for like a Ben Folds cover contest, which was then scrapped. The contest was scrapped, but his wife found the video. Ben Folds' wife found this cover that she did and sent it to him. He loved it so much, he asked her out on tour. So she toured with Ben Folds, toured with Ben Queller, was able to independently release 4 albums, and the last one was funded on Kickstarter. It was a huge success for a music project. And her most recent tour, which was just announced last week, her East Coast tour, is in the living rooms of her fans. She basically opened up the venues and sold, was like selling tickets that way, to the point that, like, she grows her audience to a level where the Conan O'Brien show notices and asks her if she wants to go on Conan. She goes on the Conan O'Brien show. So to go from dorm room videos to building a career, and having that sort of like traditionally mainstream attention would have been unthinkable. But now it's just the way that art is made. So there's a couple of things that are fascinating to me here that I'm really curious to see where things go. And the first is, what do these traditional publishers, I mean, obviously, they're like a record label and a film studio and comic book publishers and so on, they do provide value. Like, there's a lot, it's really hard work to do this stuff. it's work that, and it's stuff that has been possible for a very long time to do independently if you were savvy. Like Jonathan Coulton. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Jonathan Coulton, but that's a guy who has done this for a long time. The technology has been there for a very long time, but the difference between Jonathan Coulton and every other musician is that he was a web developer. He knew how to set up his own store, and he knew the value. Like, he just understood the culture, and plus his audience was very geeky. So his audience understood the value of DRM-free downloads or how to play Ogg Vorbis files or whatever. So the technology had been around, but it wasn't yet achievable for like non-nerds, and that is really what's changed. But there's still it still takes away from your time that you're going to be making art, and so what I'm curious about is what does the record label look like in the post-Kickstarter era? What does a film studio look like? And maybe it just continues in this path where you basically take everything that they did previously and it decentralizes. It splits into pieces, into disparate services that are artist friendly, that they can use, that are fee only, and they can just shop around and decide what they want. Or maybe they start collecting together, bundling those services and taking care of those things for you in a way that's artist friendly. So it's something I've been really curious about. And the second is, I think about the projects that I did, Kind of Bloop and XOXO, and what was odd about them, especially with Bloop, is that I'm not a musician. So you have, I was basically a fan. I'm a fan of the music that was trying to make sure that musicians got paid. And so normally, traditionally, with a Kickstarter project, it's the artist that comes up with the idea and brings it to the audience. If you're Amanda Palmer, you're like, I want to make another album, and here's what I'm going to do, and this is what the money's going to be spent on, and this is what you're going to get. And they bring it, she brings it to her fans, and they decide whether they want it or not. If there's enough people that want it, then it gets made. And if not, then not. But I'm interested in flipping that equation upside down, where maybe the fans, or you have a fan or a small group of fans self-organizing and figuring out what is the work that they want out in the world, and reaching out to the artist directly and saying, would you do this? How much would it take? And it's effectively what I did with Kind of Bloop. There's no reason you couldn't apply that to other genres. So let's say that you love a comic book illustrator and a video game designer, and you want them to work together, like James Kachalka did with Pixel Jam, where the two of them wanted to make a game together. He did the art and they did the programming, and they did a game called Glorkian Warrior, which is about to come out. But that kind of innovation could come from the fan base. Be like, I want to see these people work together, or you go to an illustrator that you love and be like, will you make a Star Wars poster, or whatever it is that you love. Seems like it would work especially well for house concerts. If you've ever seen music in someone's living room, it's amazing. It's intimate and emotional, and it's just an incredibly special way to experience music. But it's a very, it's rare, and it tends to be artists that are a particular size. But there's no reason that a fan couldn't reach out to someone that they love and say, how much would it take to get you out to play for 150 or 100 people, and then basically put it on Kickstarter to see if people bite. So the short version, and if I was going to give you a single takeaway from my experiences, it's that there's never been a better time to do something that is insane, something that is far outside of your comfort zone, something that you have an idea for, but something that you haven't done before, because the technology is there and it's easy to use and it's all very, very possible. So thank you.